Ragnar's blood seeped into the snow, creating a crimson trail that vanished into the endless white. His eyes, heavy as stones, fought to stay open as the cold pierced his very core. Abandoned by his battle brothers after the ambush, he was on the verge of surrendering to fate when a large black raven landed near his head, cawing as if bearing a message from the gods. The wounded warrior reached out with a trembling hand toward Odin's sacred bird, his vision fading into darkness. Thank you for joining us in this story. Our channel is just beginning, and every subscription means the world. It helps keep this project alive as we work toward our first 1,000 followers. If you enjoy the tale, please consider subscribing and sharing your city in the comments. Your support encourages us to keep bringing these Viking stories to life. The morning air was crisp, each breath forming a thin mist that lingered just long enough before vanishing into the pale light of dawn. The village of Ravnborg stirred slowly beneath a sky washed with the soft glow of an emerging sun, filtered through a quilt of low, heavy clouds. The scent of damp earth mixed with the sharp tang of pine and the faint, lingering smoke from night fires still smoldering near the wooden longhouses. Ravens cawed overhead, their calls sharp against the stillness, an ever-present reminder of the gods watching from above. Amid this quiet awakening, Ragnar Thorson moved through the village with steady resolve. At 32 winters, his presence was a fixture of strength and reliability among the people of Skoll. His tall frame cut a commanding silhouette against the thatched roofs as he made his way from the smithy toward the communal hearth. The weight of his battle-worn cloak, trimmed with wolf fur, settled comfortably on his broad shoulders, the coarse wool beneath it rough against his skin but a necessary armor against the cold. His dark hair, streaked with streaks of winter silver and pulled back in partial braids, swung lightly as he walked, catching bits of stray ash from the blackened stones by the forge. His face, chiseled and angular, bore the marks of time and trial. A deep scar angled across his right brow, remnants of an old wound that had nearly claimed his life during a skirmish years before. His eyes, a piercing blue-gray, scanned the village with a cautious watchfulness that made clear the burdens he carried, not only of a warrior, but of a man who bore the weight of loyalty and expectation. The village itself was alive with a quiet industry. Women leaned over looms, their hands deftly weaving wool into thick cloth, the rhythmic clatter of wooden shuttles echoing faintly in the crisp air. The steady murmurs of conversation mingled with the occasional laughter of children chasing each other between the cabins, their wooden swords clutched loosely, eyes bright with the innocent thrill of imagined battles. The smell of roasting meat curled from open fire pits, mingling with the acrid scent of burning birch, promising a hearty meal at the end of the day. Ragnar paused by the edge of the village square, where a few men sharpened blades and fitted leather straps to axes under the watchful gaze of Jarl Hrothgar's standard, a snarling wolf emblazoned in black and silver. The men nodded in quiet respect as Ragnar passed, their own hands sure and steady, but haunted by tension beneath the surface. There was an unspoken anxiety riding the biting wind, and Ragnar felt it deep in his bones. His mind churned with thoughts. The previous night's gathering at the Jarl's Hall had left a bitter taste lingering in his mouth, not from the ale or the smoke of the great hearth, but from the weight of unspoken truths. The Jarl, a grizzled man of 58 winters, had announced a raid against the neighboring Ulfhedner clan, accusing them of theft and kidnapping. Yet, beneath the Jarl's booming voice and fierce condemnation, Ragnar saw more shadows than light. The accusation had sparked a fire in the village, stoking fear and a hunger for vengeance. But Ragnar's instincts warned him otherwise. The evidence was thin, the anger perhaps fueled by something more personal. And worse still, rumors whispered in hushed tones echoed through the mead hall, whispers of a darker scheme brewing just beneath the surface. As Ragnar adjusted the worn leather strap of his axe sheath, the cool metal pressed against his thigh, grounding him in the present. He ran a calloused hand over the runic tattoos that wound around his forearms, each mark telling a story of battles won and oaths sworn to the gods and his clan. Those tattoos, etched deep with iron and blood, were more than decoration. They were a silent bond to his ancestors, to the land, and to the code of honor he lived by. Leaving the square, Ragnar's steps brought him to the longhouse where the Karandra, Thyra heir-daughter, tended to the sick and wounded, and where the village's spiritual pulse beat steady beneath the surface of everyday life. Her presence was a constant comfort and yet a source of unease for many, for her knowledge seemed to stretch beyond mortal understanding. Thyra's dwelling was modest, built of dark wood and stone, nestled near the edge of the forest. Smoke curled from its low chimney, carrying the scent of burning herbs, sage, juniper, and something faintly sweet that stirred memories of midsummer rituals and distant fires. The pale light filtered through thin cloth curtains, casting muted shadows on the walls lined with dried plants, bones, and carved talismans. Ragnar paused at the threshold, feeling the familiar weight of anticipation. Thyra's eyes were already upon him as he entered, their deep green depths reflecting a flicker of concern. Her hands, nimble and steady, rested on a small leather pouch filled with herbs and amulets, the same she had entrusted to him the night before. "I see the burden weighs heavy," she said softly, her voice carrying both warmth and an eerie certainty. "The gods whisper through the winds, and the corvids grow restless." Ragnar nodded, his jaw tightening. "The Jarl's words stir more than anger," he admitted. "There are shadows in the smoke. I fear this is no simple raid." Thyra stepped closer, lowering her voice further. "I have seen the threads of fate tangled in a way that does not bode well. The blood spilled tomorrow will not be just that of enemies." A silence hung between them, thick with unspoken fears. Ragnar let his gaze drift to the small bone amulet she pressed into his palm, a talisman carved with ancient runes meant to protect against harm and deceit. "Keep this close," she urged. "The eyes of Odin watch, but even the gods cannot save those who walk blindly into betrayal." His fingers closed around the amulet, its smooth coldness a stark contrast to the fire building beneath his skin. He swallowed hard, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down harder than the winter's chill ever could. As he stepped back into the village, Ragnar's thoughts turned to the men who would follow him into battle come dawn. Among them was Sigurd Hrothgarson, the Jarl's son, young, ambitious, and cloaked in a cold ambition that had long set Ragnar's sword on edge. Sigurd's eyes, pale and calculating, often flickered with something unreadable in Ragnar's presence. And then there was Gunnar Leifson, his oldest friend since boyhood. Gunnar's easy smile and booming laugh had carried them through countless fights, but there was a shadow beneath the surface now, an unease Ragnar could not ignore. The village settled into the rhythm of preparing for war. Blacksmiths hammered iron, their strikes ringing out like war drums. Women packed provisions, smoked meats, dried berries, and hard bread, while children clung tightly to their mothers, sensing the tension before even the adults dared speak it aloud. As the sun dipped low, the sky turning a bruised purple, Ragnar found himself alone by the village's edge, staring out into the darkening forest. The silhouettes of towering pines stretched long and thin beneath the growing stars. The cold bit deep, but it was not the cold that gnawed at him. It was the feeling of unseen eyes watching from the shadows, of whispered secrets woven into the very air he breathed. Memories flickered, of battles fought shoulder to shoulder, of laughter shared beside roaring fires, of promises made under the watchful gaze of the gods. And yet, beneath all of it, a stark realization settled like frost. Not all enemies came from beyond the village walls. The wind shifted, carrying the distant caw of a raven, sharp and clear. Ragnar closed his eyes. Ragnar lay barely conscious inside the narrow cave, the bitter wind howling outside like a restless specter. His breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, each one burning his throat as the cold seeped deeper into his shattered body. The snow, relentless and unyielding, pressed against the rough stone mouth of the shelter, hiding him from the world, but not from the creeping shadow of death that hovered just beyond his fading awareness. Pain throbbed in every limb, a relentless drum of agony that tethered him to the stark reality of his wounds. The spear lodged deep in his thigh sent sharp, stabbing jolts through his body with every shallow movement. Blood, thick and dark, soaked through the fabric of his tunic, pooling beneath him in the snow-dusted dirt. Yet despite the torment, it was the weight of betrayal that gnawed at him most, the sting sharper than any blade. The cold cave was dim, lit only by a faint glow filtering through the entrance. Outside, the raven circled low, its black feathers gleaming against the gray sky, a silent sentinel watching over the fallen warrior. Its caw echoed faintly, a haunting reminder that fate was not yet done with Ragnar. His eyelids fluttered open once more, the world around him swimming with shadows and light. It was then that a soft, hesitant rustling caught his ear. Through the haze of pain and exhaustion, he turned his gaze toward the sound. A figure moving cautiously just beyond the flickering edge of the firelight he had managed to kindle with trembling fingers. The figure was young, a woman, barely more than a girl by the look of her delicate frame, her golden hair tangled and dusted with snow. Her eyes, wide with fear and uncertainty, met Ragnar's with a mixture of relief and guarded hope. She stepped forward slowly, careful not to startle the wounded man, clutching a bundle of herbs wrapped in worn cloth. Ragnar. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, yet it carried a fierce determination beneath the frailty. I thought you were dead. The name reached deep into the warrior's soul, stirring memories he had thought lost to the cold night. He tried to answer, to reassure her, but his voice cracked and dissolved into a rasping breath. His hand twitched weakly, reaching toward her as if to grasp a lifeline. She knelt beside him, moving with delicate care as she settled the bundle on the rocky floor, pulling out leaves and salves with practiced fingers. You must hold on, she urged, her green eyes shining with a fierce light. The gods have not claimed you yet. Ragnar's gaze flickered, searching hers for truth beyond the pain. Here was a spark of life in the midst of his desolation, a fragile thread connecting him back to a world he feared slipping away. Her name was Frida. He remembered now. One of the girls taken by the Ulfhedner, or so the village had believed. But she was no captive. Her story spilled out in halting words between his shallow breaths. She and another had fled willingly, escaping the rigid confines of their homes for love, lovers among the enemy clan. The other girl had not been so fortunate, caught and slain by Sigurd's orders when the truth came to light. The weight of the revelation crushed Ragnar almost as much as his wounds. Sigurd's betrayal ran deeper than ambition. It was soaked in lies and blood, tearing apart not only families but the very fabric of their people. Frida worked silently, mixing her herbs into a poultice, pressing the cool salve against the jagged edges of his wounds. The sting was sharp but cleansing, and Ragnar gritted his teeth against the sudden flare of pain. She wrapped the injured leg with strips of cloth torn from her cloak, binding it tight enough to stem the bleeding but loose enough to allow what little circulation remained. As she tended to him, the young woman's own hands trembled, betraying a fear she dared not voice. The dangers of this moment pressed in on them both like the cold stone walls around them. A wounded man alone in the forest was prey to wolves, to enemies, and to death. But here was something more, a choice hanging between survival and surrender. Ragnar, despite the pain that shredded his body, was haunted by the knowledge that he could not simply lie here and wait. Somewhere beyond the howling wind and drifting snow, Sigurd's shadow loomed large, his treachery a poison infecting all they held dear. Frida's presence was both a blessing and a burden. To help her was to risk exposure, to invite the dangers that lurked beyond the cave's fragile protection. Yet to turn away was unthinkable. The young woman's eyes held a quiet plea, a silent promise that their fates were intertwined, woven together by the cruel hand of betrayal and by the unpredictable mercy of the gods. The raven, still perched outside, cawed sharply, its voice a crackling call that seemed to echo through the cave's narrow passage. It was a summons, a sign that the path forward was not yet lost. Ragnar struggled to sit upright, the ache flaring anew across his body. Frida steadied him, her touch warm despite the cold that clung to them both. His blue-gray eyes locked onto hers, searching for the strength to carry on. "You will not die here," she said firmly, a resolve burning in her gaze that rivaled any warrior's. "I will not let you." The decision settled within him like a stone set in ice. In this moment of vulnerability, when death stirred close, Ragnar chose life, not just for himself, but for the fragile hope embodied in the woman who had found him. He was a warrior bound by honor, but also by the threads of mercy and loyalty that defined the very soul of his people. To abandon Frida, to leave her to the merciless wilderness, would be to betray more than just his own survival. It would betray everything he fought for. So, with a ragged breath and trembling limbs, he gathered what strength remained. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but surrender was no longer an option. Together, they would face the darkness, guided by the silent watch of the raven, and by a bond forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival. As the night deepened around them, the cave became a fragile sanctuary, half prison, where fear and hope warred in equal measure. Outside, the wind howled, and the raven's sharp cries pierced the darkness, a stark reminder that even in the depths of despair, the gods still reached out through their messengers. Ragnar's mind drifted briefly to the faces of those he had lost, his brothers in arms, the Jarl, and even Gunnar's treachery, each memory a shard of pain lodged deep within. But here, in this quiet refuge, a new chapter began, one that would test his resolve beyond the edge of the blade. With Frida by his side and the raven watching overhead, he vowed that he would rise again, not as the broken man left to die in the snow, but as a force bound by justice and the unyielding spirit of his ancestors. The dawn was still far off, but even in the darkness, a flicker of light held firm. And somewhere beyond the cold and the treachery, the gods watched, waiting to see if a fallen warrior could find his way back from the brink. The morning light filtered weakly through the dense branches, casting cold, fractured patterns onto the snow-covered ground. The forest remained silent, save for the distant rustling of pine needles and the soft crunch of Ragnar's weighted steps, labored and uneven, as he dragged his injured leg forward. Each movement sent sharp, pain shooting through his thigh, but the sting of the spear was matched only by the gnawing dread that clung to his spirit. Yet, despite the agony, there was a newfound determination, born not from hope alone, but from the fragile thread of trust that had woven itself between him and the young woman who walked silently by his side. Frida moved with quiet grace, her breath misting in the frigid air as she kept close, her hand resting lightly on his arm whenever his steps faltered. She said little, but the unspoken language between them spoke volumes, an exchange of glances, a slight nod, a subtle tightening of her grip. She was his anchor, steady and unwavering, even as the world tipped precariously beneath them. The path led them away from the stark isolation of the cave, through a narrow ravine where the wind howled like a restless spirit. Ragnar's ears caught the familiar, eerie caws of the raven above, circling in protective arcs, a dark sentinel against the pale sky. The bird's presence was comforting and strange all at once, a reminder of the god's unseen gaze. The weight of her words settled heavily on Ragnar. He knew the cost of trust in these times. To be a wounded man was to be vulnerable not only to enemies but to suspicion. To be a stranger was to invite silence or worse. But in Frida's gaze, there was no doubt, no hesitation, only fierce loyalty. Together, they approached the nearest cabin, a stout structure built from thick logs, its roof heavy with snow and icicles glinting like shattered glass. Frida knocked twice, a simple rhythm that echoed in the cold air. Moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and weathered hands, dressed in a woolen dress and a thick cloak of bear fur. Her gaze flickered immediately to Ragnar's blood-stained form. "Frida," the woman said, voice low but not unkind. "You have brought the warrior at last." The young woman nodded, stepping inside and guiding Ragnar gently over the threshold. The warmth hit him like a wave. Thick smoke from a peat fire, the scent of dried herbs hanging in the air, the faint musk of animals sheltered nearby. His body sagged, exhausted beyond words, but the fire's glow pulled at something deep within him, coaxing life from the shadows of pain. The cabin was modest yet filled with quiet purpose. Shelves lined one wall, heavy with jars of salted meats, bundles of herbs, and carved bone talismans. A wooden table, scarred and worn, sat near the hearth, scattered with leather strips and small tools. On the floor, furs and woven mats softened the hard timber underfoot. Ragnar's eyes traced the room, taking in the details. The careful placement of a small carved raven perched by the fire, its glossy feathers catching the flames. A worn weaving loom in the corner, half-finished cloth draped across its frame, and the lingering scent of pine resin and healing salves. Here was a place that held the echoes of both battle and peace, a crossroads where strength met tenderness. Frida helped him lower himself onto a thick fur near the hearth. Her hands moved skillfully, pulling back his cloak and tunic to reveal torn fabric and darkening bruises. She produced a bundle of clean cloth and a small wooden bowl filled with warm water, steeped with fragrant herbs. Her fingers were steady as she began to clean the wounds, the cold water a shock to his fevered skin, but a balm to the dirt and blood. Ragnar winced, but did not complain. His eyes caught hers, searching for reassurance beyond the pain. There was no pity or fear in her gaze, only a quiet respect, a recognition that he was not merely a broken man, but a warrior still worthy of care. The woman from the cabin, Frida's mother by the look of her, was already moving about the room. She returned with a narrow wooden cup filled with thick, dark broth, the smell rich with roasted meat and wild herbs. Frida lifted the cup to Ragnar's lips, encouraging him gently. "Drink," she said softly. "You need your strength." The liquid was bitter but nourishing, warming his throat and settling deep in his belly like kindling for a dying fire. He drank slowly, savoring the heat as it fought the cold that still clung to his bones. As Frida worked, she hummed an ancient tune, low and steady, a song known only to those born of these lands and steeped in their old ways. Her voice was a thread weaving through the silence, binding the moment with a fragile grace. For hours, they remained like this, no need for words, only the rhythm of care and quiet presence. Ragnar felt the tension in his body loosen, muscle by muscle, as the warmth seeped into his limbs and the steady touch of healing hands erased the sharp edges of pain. In the soft glow of the firelight, Frida's features emerged more clearly. Her pale skin flushed with exertion, the golden strands of her hair falling loose from their intricate braids, and eyes that held both the innocence of youth and a fierce resilience born of hardship. A small birthmark rested just below her jawline. A faint scar etched on her neck hinted at past struggles. Her hands, though delicate, bore the calluses of labor and survival. At one point, As she wrapped a fresh bandage around his thigh, their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact electric with unspoken meaning. Ragnar's breath caught, and for a moment, the battlefield, the betrayal, and the cruelty of the world outside melted away, leaving only the fragile connection between two souls caught in a shared struggle for life. Though they spoke little, the silence between them was filled with understanding. Frida's eyes often lingered on the amulet nestled against Ragnar's chest, a simple bone carving marked with runes, faintly glowing in the firelight. She traced its edges with a finger, a subtle question in her gaze. Ragnar met her look, his voice low and rough. It was given to me by Thyra, the Karandra. It is said the gods watched through such signs. Frida nodded, a shadow crossing her face. Your wounds run deep, not just from the spear, but from those who should have stood beside you. He gave a faint, bitter smile. Betrayal cuts sharper than any blade. One's trust is a precious thing, and fragile. Her eyes darkened with sorrow. You carry more than battle scars, warrior. You carry the weight of broken oaths. The fire crackled between them, a barrier and a bridge. Outside, the raven remained vigilant, its sharp cries ringing like a warning through the quiet village. As evening deepened, the cabin's guardians, Frida's family, gathered quietly, offering what help they could. The women brought more herbs and poultices. The men secured the area, eyes stern and watchful. Despite the modesty of the village, their hospitality was fierce and protective, a silent vow to shelter the wounded warrior from the storm beyond their borders. Throughout the night, Frida remained by Ragnar's side, her presence a constant reassurance amid the shadows of pain and uncertainty. At times, when his eyes fluttered closed under the strain, she would softly stroke his brow or tuck a stray lock of hair behind his ear, gestures tender and human in a world often cruel and unyielding. The hours stretched long, and with them came moments woven from threads of vulnerability and trust. Ragnar, who had known only command in combat, found himself humbled by the simplicity of these acts, the sharing of warmth, the passing of water, the quiet exchange of hope in a glance. In the stillness, memories surfaced, faces of those lost, the sting of betrayal, the weight of duty, and yet, here, in this fragile sanctuary, there was also the faintest glimmer of something more. A future not yet written, where loyalty might be restored and honor reclaimed. When dawn finally crept through the frost-laden window, casting pale light upon the worn wooden floor, Ragnar felt a tentative strength returning. The pain lingered, a constant companion, but it no longer defined him. With Frida's steadfast care and the raven's watchful eye, he had crossed the threshold from despair to resolve. As the village stirred to life outside, voices rising and the clatter of daily tasks resuming, Ragnar understood that his survival was more than mere chance. It was a testament to the bonds forged in the harshest fires, to the unseen hands of the gods, and to the fragile, enduring power of trust. In that small cabin, nestled among hills blanketed in snow, a warrior once left for dead found sanctuary. And with it, the first fragile threads of hope, woven from blood, betrayal, and the unwavering flight of a sacred raven, began to bind a path toward redemption. The news traveled faster than the biting northern winds. Whispers carried on the breath of hunters returning from the forest, on the tongues of traders passing through Ravnborg's outlying paths, and in the cautious glances exchanged by neighboring clans. The tale of a wounded warrior, thought to be dead, Ragnar Thorson, found alive, sheltered by a humble village hidden within the hills, spread like wildfire. It stirred not just curiosity but unease, suspicion, and ultimately, the gathering storm of outside attention that threatened to shatter the fragile sanctuary where he struggled to heal. The village that had once been a quiet refuge now found itself under the weight of eyes that were both wary and hungry. Frida's small family, once protected by isolation and the kindness of kinship, sensed the growing pressure even before the first visitors arrived. The hearth fires burned. He spoke little, but his presence sent ripples through the village, a palpable tension that tightened like a noose. Frida's mother met them at the edge of the settlement, her eyes sharp and unwavering. "You seek something," she said, her voice steady as the earth beneath their feet. "It is not here." Irik's gaze swept over the humble cabins, then landed on the faint tracks leading toward the woods. "We have heard that the fallen warrior lives," he said, his words heavy with accusation. "The Jarl's son and his killers will want him dead, or worse, captured." The warning echoed in the hushed voices around the fire. Ragnar's breath caught. The world had not forgotten him, nor forgiven the betrayal that had nearly claimed his life. His enemies still hunted him, and the sanctuary was no longer safe. Inside his shelter, Ragnar met with Frida and her family. The weight of the situation pressed on him like a storm cloud ready to break. "They will not stop," he said, voice rough but resolute. "If we remain here, we will only bring danger to this place." Frida's eyes, bright with unshed tears and fierce loyalty, met his. "I will not let them take you again. We will fight if we must." But the warrior shook his head slowly, the pain flaring in his wound. "This is not our fight alone," he murmured. "I must seek allies. The clans must unite, or all will fall to Sigurd's madness." Outside, the villagers gathered in small groups, their faces drawn tight with fear and determination. Among them were elders who spoke in low tones about ancient pacts and broken treaties, wary of involving the wider clan politics. Yet even they recognized that the shadow creeping over their home demanded action. Thyra's arrival was both a relief and a reminder of the fragile thread upon which their fate now balanced. The Karandra had ventured far beyond Ravnborg, seeking news, aid, and signs from the gods. Her gaze was sharp as she entered the cabin where Ragnar rested, eyes flickering to the amulet that still hung heavy beneath his tunic. "The Corvids have flown beyond your sight," she said softly, "but their watch continues. The gods demand you rise, for the path ahead is dark and treacherous." Her words stirred a fire within Ragnar's chest, a mingling of dread and purpose. The pain in his leg was a constant companion, but the burden of leadership pressed heavier. He could no longer hide in the shadows. The following days were a whirlwind of whispered meetings and cautious plans. Ravens seemed to flock more thickly overhead, their cries sharp and insistent as if urging action. Word arrived that the Ulfhednir, once enemies, were willing to parley, drawn by the news of Sigurd's betrayal and the chance for peace. Yet, the path to alliance was fraught with suspicion. Many viewed Ragnar's survival with skepticism. Some whispered that a man left for dead by his own kin could not be trusted, that his judgment was clouded by pain and loss. Others feared that by harboring him, the village had invited ruin upon themselves. The tension was not merely political, but deeply personal. Gunnar's treachery echoed in the memories of all who had once called him brother. His absence was a wound no less painful than Ragnar's own. The betrayal had fractured not just bloodlines, but the very soul of their people. Ragnar grappled with the weight of these fractures. How to heal a clan torn by deceit? How to protect those who had risked their lives for him, when every step forward invited the threat of violence? One night, under a sky swollen with stars and the watchful eyes of the raven constellations, Ragnar stood at the edge of the village, staring into the dark woods. The cold bit into his skin, but it was the chill of uncertainty that settled deepest in his bones. Frida approached quietly, her breath a mist in the frosty air. She placed a hand on his arm, grounding him. "They will come," she said softly, "but you are not alone." He nodded, drawing strength from her presence. "The gods test us all," he replied. "But sometimes their signs are hard to read." As dawn broke, the village prepared for what might come. Warriors sharpened blades, The women packed provisions, and children were sent to the safety of elders and nearby caves. The air was thick with the scent of smoke and the low murmurs of prayer. Then, just as the sun climbed higher, a distant horn echoed through the valley, a call that sent a shiver rippling through the snow-laden pines. Figures appeared on the ridge above the village, silhouettes against the pale sky. Not enemies this time, but allies. Ulfhedner warriors, led by their chieftain and guided by Thyra's knowledge, arrived with purpose and caution. The fragile alliance was born not from trust, but necessity. The enemy of one was the enemy of all. For now, the clans would stand together, united by the shadow of Sigurd's treachery and the shared hope that the god's messenger, the raven, had not abandoned them. Yet, even in this moment of uneasy peace, Ragnar knew the true battle was only beginning. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and the path to justice would be paved with sacrifice and fire. He glanced once more at the black bird perched silently on a frost-covered branch above. Its gleaming eyes held the weight of ancient wisdom and relentless watchfulness. The message was clear. The gods had given a sign, and the time to act had come. The fate of Ravnborg, and perhaps all their people, hung in the balance. And so, as the sun warmed the winter air, Ragnar Thorson rose from the ashes of death, burdened by wounds both seen and unseen, ready to face the storm gathering on the horizon. The dawn broke pale and fragile over Ravnborg, the sky a muted wash of gray that promised little warmth. Snow clung to every surface, thick and unyielding, a silent witness to the events that had brought the village to the brink. The longhouses stood stoic, their dark wood stark against the white landscape, smoke rising in thin spirals from their chimneys. Outside, the air carried a brittle stillness, as if the land itself held its breath, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. Ragnar Thorson stood near the edge of the village, leaning heavily on a carved wooden staff that bore the marks of his people, runes of protection and endurance etched deep into its surface. His breath came in ragged bursts, the effort of standing solid despite the still fresh wounds weighing on his body. The spear wound in his thigh had long since stiffened, the pain a dull but persistent reminder of how close death had been. Yet his eyes, steel blue and sharp beneath furrowed brows, held the embers of unyielding resolve. Behind him, the small village stirred. Frida's family and the villagers who had pledged their loyalty to the cause moved quietly, preparing for the day ahead. Their faces bore the lines of fear and exhaustion, but also a fierce determination that spoke louder than words. This quiet strength filled Ragnar's chest with a bittersweet pride. They had sheltered a broken man, and now they were ready to face the gathering tempest beside him. The fragile alliance forged with the Ulfhedner was already showing signs of strain among the villagers. Whispers of distrust lingered in the shadows, old wounds and rivalries simmering beneath the surface. It was a fragile balance of hope and suspicion. One misstep could shatter it all. Ragnar's gaze scanned the horizon where the tree-line met the sky. The first sound to break the stillness was a low, deep horn. It echoed across the valley, a summons to war and judgment. His heart tightened as he recognized the call, Sigurd's herald, a reminder that the usurper still held sway in Ravnborg, and that the reckoning was near. From the ridge above the village, dark figures emerged, moving with purpose and cold precision. They were ravens in human form, Sigurd's loyal warriors, hardened men whose eyes held no mercy. Their approach was a blade slicing through the fragile peace, a specter of death born on the winter wind. Ragnar turned to meet the eyes of his allies, Frida, Thyra, and the Ulfhedner chieftain, whose grim nod confirmed the urgency of the moment. Thyra's green eyes shimmered with unspoken warnings, her fingers tightening briefly around the bone amulet that still hung from Ragnar's neck. The Carandra's presence was a balm and a beacon, her knowledge of the gods while guiding them through the gathering darkness. The village elders gathered near the hearth, their voices hushed but resolute as they debated the coming confrontation. The question hung heavy in the air. From the shadows of the trees beyond the village, a figure stepped forward. Tall and proud, clad in the rich furs of a chieftain, Sigurd Hrothgarson emerged like a winter spectre. His pale hair caught the weak light, and his cold blue eyes locked onto Ragnar with a mixture of disdain and disdainful triumph. The scar above his lip curled slightly in a cruel smile as he raised his sword in a slow, deliberate gesture. Ragnar Thorson, Sigurd's voice cut through the silence like a sharpened blade. You crawl from the grave to challenge me? You, who have lost everything, honor, strength, and the favor of the gods. The crowd tensed, whispers rippling like wine through dry leaves. The men who had once called Ragnar brother shifted uneasily, unsure whether to stand with the man they had forsaken or with the son of the Jarl who now claimed the mantle of power. Ragnar straightened, pain flaring in his leg, but swallowed beneath iron resolve. His voice was low, steady, carrying the weight of a man who had stared death in the face and returned. Sigurd, your crown is forged in lies and blood. You have betrayed your own bloodline, spilled innocent blood, and turned brother against brother. This ends today. A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to pause, the world holding tight to the moment before the storm. Sigurd laughed, a cold, hollow sound that echoed through the trees. Words are wind, Ragnar. You have nothing left but bitter defiance. Your allies are weak, your cause doomed. Lay down your arms and save what little life you have left. Ragnar's eyes flicked to Frida and Thyra, to the Ulfhednar warriors standing grimly behind him. Their presence was a fragile shield, but it was enough to kindle the fire burning within his chest. He stepped forward, staff raised, every motion a declaration of resolve. I will not bow to a usurper, not while breath still stirs my lungs. The gods have not finished with me, nor with Ravnborg. The first clash came swift and brutal. Sigurd's warriors surged forward like a winter gale, axes and swords gleaming as they struck. The defenders of Ravnborg met them with fierce determination, shields raised, voices raised in battle cries that echoed the ancient songs of their ancestors. Ragnar fought at the front, every movement measured but fierce. The pain in his leg throbbed with each step, but he ignored it, focusing instead on the rhythm of combat, the clash of metal, the shouts of men, the scent of blood mingling with the sharpness of pine and smoke. The battle was a tempest, fierce enough to shake the earth beneath their feet. Sigurd's men pressed hard, their numbers and training formidable. Yet the unity of the clans, forged in the crucible of betrayal and survival, was a force neither side had expected. Amid the chaos, Ragnar's gaze locked on Sigurd once more. The usurper moved with a cruel grace, his sword flashing in deadly arcs. Each strike was a challenge, a demand for submission or death. Ragnar parried, his own axe rising in swift counter. The clang of their weapons rang out, a harsh melody punctuating the cries of battle. Time seemed to slow as the two adversaries fought, a duel not just of strength, but of wills. You have lost, Sigurd, Ragnar growled, muscles burning with exertion. Your blood is stained with treachery, and the gods will not bless your reign. Sigurd sneered, eyes gleaming with malice. The gods have abandoned you, old warrior. You are relic and fool. A fierce cry burst from Ragnar's lips as he pressed forward, the last of his strength driving the blow. Their weapons met with a force that sent shockwaves through his arms. The clash was brutal, the edge of his axe biting deep into Sigurd's guard. But the fight was far from over. From the outskirts of the battlefield, a sudden roar rose, a call that split the air. The Ulfhednar warriors, true to their word, had flanked Sigurd's forces, turning the tide. The surprise attack sowed confusion and panic among the usurper's ranks. Sigurd's eyes flashed with rage as he barked orders. rallying his men for a final push. But the unity and ferocity of their opponents were overwhelming. One by one, Sigurd's warriors fell or fled, their resolve shattered beneath the combined assault. Sigurd himself fought on, desperate and furious, but the weight of his sins bore down too heavily. At last, Ragnar found himself face to face with the usurper once more. Bloodied and exhausted, but unbroken, Sigurd's sword trembled in his grip, the fight draining from his limbs. "Your reign is over," Ragnar said, voice cold and resolute. "You will answer for your betrayals." Sigurd's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Then do what you must." With a final, swift motion, Ragnar disarmed Sigurd, sending the sword skittering across the snow. He stepped back, raising his axe not in anger, but in judgment. Around them, the battle quieted. The survivors of Sigurd's faction were bound and marked with the runes of exile and shame. Gunnar's name was spoken with scorn, his betrayal a stain that would not be forgotten. As the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the bloodied snow, Ravnborg took its first breath of freedom in many moons. In the great hall, now filled with the combined clans and their leaders, Ragnar stood before the gathered. The weight of the past was heavy, but so too was the promise of the future. Thyra approached, her eyes shining with a fierce pride as she touched the bone amulet on Ragnar's chest. "The gods have not forsaken you," she said softly. "They sent their raven to watch over you, because your path is not yet done." Outside, the sacred bird perched atop the hall's roof, its dark feathers gleaming like polished onyx. Its gaze swept the horizon, a silent guardian watching over a land reborn from the fires of betrayal and blood. Ragnar's voice carried through the hall, steady and sure. "We stand not as clans divided, but as one people. Let this day be the dawn of a new Ravnborg, one forged in loyalty, honor, and the unbreakable bond of our ancestors." The crowd erupted in cautious but hopeful cries, the sound rising like the wind through the pines. And as the great Corvo lifted into the sky, its wings beating strong against the cold air, Ragnar felt a certainty settle within him. The gods were watching. Their signs were clear. And the story of the warrior who should have died but was saved by the sacred raven would be told for generations, not as a tale of defeat, but as a testament to resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of faith. In that moment of hard-won peace, beneath the vast northern sky, the shadows of the past gave way to the light of a future yet to be written. The firelight flickered softly against the timber walls of the great hall, casting long, wavering shadows that danced upon the faces of those gathered. The air was thick with the mingled scents of smoke, pine, and the lingering warmth of spiced mead. A hush had fallen over the crowd, the clamor of battle and betrayal replaced by a fragile stillness. Here, in this moment suspended between past wounds and the promise of what might come, the weight of wounds deeper than flesh hung heavy in the air. Ragnar stood at the center, his breath steady but worn, the scars of his journey etched upon his body and soul. Each step he took carried the burden of survival, not just his own, but that of a clan fractured by lies, ambition, and the cold hand of death. The room was filled with faces both familiar and changed, some hardened by loss, others softened by hope newly found. Frida's presence by his side was a quiet anchor, a living testament to the bond forged in that hidden cave, born of shared struggle and fragile trust. Her eyes met his with a fierce light, a mixture of gratitude and unspoken understanding that transcended words. The long journey of pain and healing had transformed them both, and together they embodied the resilience of their people. Thyra stepped forward, her green eyes gleaming with the fire of conviction and ancient wisdom. Her voice broke the silence, carrying a weight that resonated deeply within all who listened. The gods have spoken through their raven. It is no mere coincidence that Ragnar survived when death claimed so many. The sacred bird has chosen him, and through him, the fate of Ravensborg is woven anew. Her words stirred a ripple through the assembled clans, a mixture of awe, reverence, and cautious hope. The sacred raven, the crowd's tension eased, the lines between suspicion and solidarity blurring in the warmth of shared purpose. The elders nodded slowly, their voices rising in ancient tongues to call upon the blessings of the gods and the ancestors. The longhouses outside seemed to breathe in unison, the land itself responding to the fragile truce. Ragnar looked to Thyro again, the Carandra's hand resting lightly on the bone amulet around his neck. This token, once just a charm, now feels like the pulse of the gods themselves, he said softly. It carried me through the darkness when all seemed lost. It is a reminder that even in the coldest winter, the flame of hope endures. Thyra smiled, a rare softness in her gaze. And it is through that hope that we find the strength to forgive. To forgive is not to forget, but to release the bonds of hatred before they consume us all. The hall fell into a contemplative silence. Forgiveness was no light burden. It was a slow and painful journey, a path walked only by those brave enough to seek peace amid ruin. Ragnar's voice lowered, rich with the weight of hard-earned wisdom. I do not claim to be without fault. I have known anger and despair, but I have also seen what lies beyond, the chance to build anew, to forge a clan unbroken by deceit. He turned toward the gathering, eyes scanning faces marked by hardship and hope. Let this be a day of reckoning not just for Sigurd's treachery, but for the wounds we carry within ourselves. Let us lay down our grudges like broken weapons, and rise instead with the strength of unity. A slow, deliberate nod passed among the leaders of the clans. The Ulfhednar chieftain, his face weathered and stoic, stepped forward with a solemn gesture of alliance. We stand with you, Ragnar Thorson. The old hatreds must end, or all will fall to ruin. Together, we are stronger than any blade or betrayal. Frida's family, once silent guardians in the shadows, now raised their voices in quiet agreement, a chorus woven from the threads of loyalty and survival. The lines between clans blurred in that hall, replaced by a collective heartbeat racing toward a fragile dawn. Yet even as the promise of peace took root, the echoes of loss lingered like cold wind through the trees. Ragnar's mind flickered to those who would never see this day, fallen comrades, the Jarl whose wisdom had been silenced, and the friends turned foes. Their sacrifices were etched into the earth and blood of Ravensborg, a somber reminder that peace demanded vigilance as well as courage. Frida's hand slipped into Ragnar's, a gesture both tender and fierce. You saved me, she whispered, voice thick with emotion. Now, let me stand with you, not as a captive, but as a warrior of this land. Ragnar's grip tightened, a silent vow passing between them. In this moment, she was no longer a symbol of betrayal or fear, but a beacon of new beginnings, one born from the unlikeliest of circumstances and the most sacred of bonds. Outside, the sacred raven lifted from its perch atop the hall's roof, wings spread wide against the pale sky. Its cry cut through the stillness, a sharp call that rippled across the valley like thunder. The gods were watching, their presence felt in every breath of wind, every flicker of shadow and light. And as the sun's weak rays pushed through the gathering clouds, painting the snow in hues of fire and hope, the people of Ravensborg stepped forward together, scarred, weary, but unbroken. The story of a warrior betrayed and abandoned, saved by a sacred sign, had become a story of redemption and resilience. A tale whispered by the crackling fires in longhouses, carried on the wings of ravens, and etched into the hearts of those who dared to believe that even in the darkest winter, the gods might still grant a second chance. Ragnar's journey was far from over, but in this moment, surrounded by those who had chosen to stand with him, he found something more precious than victory. He found a future born from the ashes of betrayal, a path lit by faith, honor, and the unyielding spirit that defined his people. The shadows of the past would always linger, but beneath the vast northern sky, a new dawn had broken, and with it, the promise that no darkness was so deep that even the gods could not reach through, offering hope to those who dared to see. The days that followed the fierce battle unfolded with a quiet, yet profound transformation. Ravensborg, once fractured by betrayal and suspicion, began to breathe anew, its wounds healing slowly, not just in flesh but in spirit. The snow, which had so long been a silent witness to pain and loss, now glistened beneath a pale spring sun, softening the harsh edges of winter and promising the slow return of life. Ragnar moved through the village with measured steps, each one a testament to endurance. His legs still throbbed with the memory of the spear, and the scars etched into his skin whispered of the narrow line between death and survival. Yet, beneath the surface of weariness, there was a steady flame kindling, a quiet resolve to rebuild what had been broken. The villagers greeted him with cautious smiles and nods of respect. They no longer saw just the man who had been left to die in the snow, but a symbol of resilience, one who had faced the abyss and returned carrying the weight of their collective hope. The longhouses, once heavy with silence and unease, now echoed with the steady rhythm of renewed life. Children's laughter played among the thawing grounds. The smoke from hearth fires rose in gentle spirals, and the scent of fresh bread mingled with the ever-present pine. Frida had become an integral part of this rebirth. No longer the frightened girl hiding from shadows, she stood among the villagers with quiet strength, her hands calloused from labor and her eyes bright with determination. The bond forged in the crucible of hardship between her and Ragnar had deepened, a connection born not only of shared survival, but of mutual respect and understanding. In her presence, the village found a living reminder that even the most fractured souls could be mended. The elders, once hesitant to embrace the changes, now spoke openly of hope and healing. They gathered around the great stone of Skoll, its cracks mended with sap and wood, symbolizing the fragile but enduring strength of their people. The old tales were rewritten, not to erase the pain of betrayal, but to honor the courage that had risen from it. Songs were sung of the raven's watchful eyes, and the sacred bird became a herald of protection, an emblem etched into shields and carved into the wooden beams of new homes. Thyra's wisdom continued to guide them, her presence a steady thread weaving through the fabric of this healing community. Her amulets and herbs were sought not just for physical ailments, but for the wounds of the soul, binding the tribe together through rituals that honored the gods and the ancestors. She taught that the scars left by betrayal need not define them, but could instead be transformed into marks of strength, a lesson etched as deeply into their spirits as the runes carved into their weapons. Among the changes was a newfound acceptance of alliances once thought impossible. The once bitter feud with the Ulfhedner clan had softened into cautious friendship, nurtured by shared loss and the vision of a united future. Trade resumed along the forest paths, and with it came stories, laughter, and the mingling of kin. Each step toward unity a fragile thread stitching the fabric of a broader community. Ragnar, though still bearing the physical and emotional marks of his ordeal, found solace in this fragile peace. Yet, beneath his calm exterior, he wrestled with the memories of those lost, the Jarl, whose wisdom had once steered them, Gunnar, whose betrayal had cut deepest, and those nameless warriors who had fallen in the icy grip of treachery. Their faces haunted the quiet moments between day and night, a reminder that peace was never given lightly and that vigilance must remain. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the distant hills, painting the sky with hues of amber and rose, Ragnar stood atop a ridge overlooking Ravensborg. The village lay sprawled below, its smoke rising like prayers into the crisp air. Beside him, Frida's hand found his, warm and steady against the chill. The raven, now a familiar sight, circled overhead before settling. Among the many who emerged from the shadows was a young warrior, newly arrived from a distant village. His name was Einar, and though untested in battle, his eyes held the same steely resolve that had carried Ragnar through the darkest nights. The clans welcomed him not as an outsider, but as a part of their growing family, a testament to the healing that was possible when old walls crumbled. Yet, for all the hope that blossomed, the path ahead remained uncertain. The memory of Sigurd's treachery lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon, a warning that darkness could return when least expected. Ragnar knew that peace was not a resting place, but a journey, one that demanded strength, wisdom, and the courage to face shadows both without and within. One cold morning, after years of rebuilding, Ragnar found himself once again at the edge of the forest, watching the snow melt into spring's first green shoots. The raven appeared as if summoned, landing lightly on a nearby bough. It raised its head, cawing a call that echoed through the trees. Ragnar smiled faintly, reaching out a hand, not in desperation this time, but in acknowledgement. The journey of a warrior was never truly done. There would always be battles to fight, oaths to keep, and paths to forge beneath the ever-watchful eyes of the gods. He turned back toward the village, where the sounds of life, voices, footsteps, the laughter of children, wove together into a tapestry of hope. The scars of the past remained, but they were no longer chains. They were marks of survival, reminders of the resilience that defined their people. And as the raven lifted once more into the sky, its wings casting a shadow over the land, Ragnar felt the steady pulse of the earth beneath his feet and the quiet certainty that he was part of something greater, a legacy woven from blood and faith, betrayal and redemption, death and the unyielding will to rise again. In the heart of Ravnborg, beneath the vast northern sky, the story of a warrior once left to die had become a legend, not of loss, but of enduring strength, not of despair, but of the indomitable spirit that binds the living to their gods, their kin, and the unbroken cycle of life itself. The fire in the great hall flickered low, shadows stretching long across the faces gathered in quiet reverence. The sound of voices had softened to murmurs, the weight of what had passed settling deep into the bones of those who listened. Outside, the cold wind whispered through the cracks in the wooden walls, carrying with it the scent of thawing snow and distant pine. The long night had given way to a fragile dawn, but the echoes of betrayal and blood still lingered, woven into the fabric of Ravnborg's soul. Ragnar stood resolute, his body scarred, his spirit tempered by pain and endurance. Every breath he drew was a testament to survival. Survival not just of flesh, but of honor, loyalty, and the unshakable bond that held a people together in a world carved by steel and shadow. His eyes, once heavy with weariness, now shone with a quiet fire. The journey had been brutal, a path strewn with loss and hardship, yet it had also been a crucible that forged a new kind of strength. Beside him, Frida's presence was steady and sure. She moved with the calm certainty of one who had faced her own darkness and emerged stronger for it. Their hands met briefly, fingers intertwined, a silent vow shared between two souls bound by fate and the harsh realities of their world. Thyra's voice broke the stillness, soft but unwavering. The gods have spoken through their raven. It has watched over you, carried the weight of your fate, and now it calls you to lead. Your path is not yet finished. Ragnar nodded, feeling the weight of the bone amulet against his chest. It was more than a talisman. It was a symbol of the god's gaze, a reminder that even when all seemed lost, the threads of destiny could be rewoven. The raven's sharp cry echoed faintly outside, a haunting melody carried on the northern wind. In the days that followed, Ravensbourg began to breathe again. The scars of battle remained, etched into the timber and the earth, but the wounds in the hearts of its people slowly began to close. The clans, once fractured by suspicion and strife, found tentative footing toward unity. Old grudges softened beneath the weight of shared loss and the hope for a future not defined by betrayal. Ragnar walked among his people with a newfound purpose. The pain in his leg was a constant reminder of how close he had come to death, but it did not weaken him. Instead, it grounded him, a reminder that life, precious and fleeting, must be defended with unwavering resolve. Even as the seasons shifted and the snows melted into the promise of spring, the memory of treachery lingered like a shadow at the edge of the forest. Trust was fragile, and the road ahead uncertain. Yet, beneath the wide northern sky, Ragnar found solace in the knowledge that he was not alone. The gods were watching. The raven was watching. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in hues of fire and ice, Ragnar stood at the edge of the village. The air was thick with the scent of pine resin and the soft murmur of the river winding through the valley. Above him, the raven circled, its black wings cutting a silhouette against the fading light. It called out, a sound both wild and ancient, carrying the weight of countless winters and battles. Frida joined him silently, her gaze following the bird's flight. "Do you believe the gods truly walk among us?" she asked quietly. Ragnar's eyes never left the raven. "I do not know if Odin himself walks these lands," he replied, his voice rough but steady. "But I know that when the world is at its darkest, when betrayal cuts deepest, there is something, some force, that reaches through the shadows. A sign, a chance, a promise that we are not forsaken." She squeezed his hand gently. "Then we will honor that promise," she said, "with every breath and every blade. For ourselves, and for those who will come after us." The wind stirred, carrying the raven's cry far across the frozen hills. Ragnar felt it deep in his bones, a call to stand, to fight, and to lead. The scars of the past would not fade easily, but neither would the spirit of those who survived. In the end, the story was not simply of a man left to die, but of a people who refused to break, of a warrior who rose from the cold grasp of death, guided by a sacred sign, and found in survival a new beginning. The gods had many eyes, and sometimes their messengers came not with thunder or flame, but with the steady, watchful flight of a raven. As the night deepened and stars kindled in the northern sky, Ragnar turned toward the village, toward the faces of those who had placed their hope in him. The path ahead was long, and the shadows would never fully retreat. But with the gods watching and the raven soaring, there was a light that no winter could extinguish. And so, beneath the endless sky, the story of Ragnar Thorson passed into legend, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, the gods may grant a second chance to those who dare to see their signs. If you found strength in this tale, join us again as we journey further into the world of Vikings, where honor and betrayal walk hand in hand, and the line between gods and men blurs in the frozen winds. Subscribe, share your thoughts, and stand with us by the hearth, for many more stories await, stories of shadows, blood, and the enduring spirit of the North. Because in the end, even the coldest winter holds the promise of spring, and sometimes, compassion is the fiercest weapon a Viking can wield.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.